on this computer. There we go. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Authorsphere. I'm your host, Dan Alatorre, and joining me today is budding TikTok sensation, Pastor Tut. Welcome aboard.
Oh, thank you, Dan. It's really great to be here. It's great to meet you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So we met, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, a month ago on TikTok, through TikTok, I guess we should say.
Yes.
I think
discovered your books.
Yeah, you read one of my books and you tagged me in it, which got my attention, of course. And so I went over and checked out a bunch of your videos. It looks like you're having a good time with it. How long have you been doing TikTok?
Just a few months, actually. I got into it because I was watching my wife laugh at a lot of videos, to be honest. And she joined because of Book Doc.
Yeah.
And she was able to discover new authors. And that's how your name actually came up.
Yeah, she mentioned in some other video, or maybe a reply to some video I had out there, that she was some book I was talking about probably, and she goes, "I'll have to recommend this to my husband." So I typed that in, "Who's your husband?" And I clicked. I'm like, wait a minute. Click through. I'm like, oh wait, it's her. It's your wife. So,
yeah.
Is she a pretty avid reader?
We both are. She reads more than I do. With two jobs and everything else for myself, I just try to find time. But she's one, she'll read and review quite a bit, probably a few books a week sometimes.
Really? Wow.
Depending on what she's reading.
What would you say she averages over the course of a month?
I'd say probably about 15 books a month.
That is huge. I thought, a couple books a week, 2 or 3 times, 8.
Yeah.
Times 4 weeks, 8 or 10, but 15 is a lot. What about yourself? How many do you usually get through?
I'm lucky if I get through 3 or 4 a month.
That's sometimes still a lot. That's still what I would see. Here's the difference. When I sit down to write a book, I'm probably thinking about it for a month. I'm probably writing it for 2 months, sometimes a little longer. I actually write pretty fast. But as you know, some authors take a year to write a book, some take 5 years to write a book. So even at my speed, where I'm like, okay, I can write a book in 90 days, 65 days, something like that. A good novel, good length novel, not something short. It's still 2 months. And then between editing and beta readers and all that, that's another month. So if I was pushing it, I could produce 4 books a year. If I was really organized, maybe 6 books. That's a lot. And you hear somebody goes, I read 6 by the 15th of the month. It's like, whoa,
Yeah, for both of us, it just depends on what we're reading. Like I'm a huge Stephen King fan.
Yeah.
I read my first Stephen King book when I was 9 years old, and I won't tell you how long ago that actually was now.
You don't tell me that, but what book was it of his?
Carrie.
Really? You read Carrie first?
I actually read it in 1976. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Now we know how we are.
Yeah.
I never read Carrie. I became a Stephen King fan. First of all, I think my sister liked his books. Okay, my older sister. I come from a large family. There's 7 kids in my family, so I was like number 6 out of 7. So a lot of older kids who would be bringing various books home and paperbacks that you had to read for school or stuff you're reading at a swim meet, and then they're sitting on a bookshelf. So there was a pretty eclectic variety for me to choose from that were just in the house. But I never read anything of Stephen King, and my exposure to Stephen King stories, let's say, was through movies. And most of the movies, I don't think I ever went to see one at a theater while I was growing up, but it would be like as they eventually end up on TV or whatever, and they weren't all good. Let's say that. Not every rendition of his books that ended up visually was good. Now, I saw The Shining and I was like, that's an amazing film. I saw that movie. Then I read the book and I was like, wow, there's a lot more. Actually, that's not true. I saw The Shining, and then before I read it, I was at a friend's house in college. And he had a stack of Stephen King's books. We're waiting, me and him were going out, and we're waiting for his brother to finish getting dressed or whatever. And so we're sitting around, and I see the stack of Stephen King books. And I go, oh yeah, Stephen King. He goes, do you like Stephen King? I was like, it's not really for me. And he goes, what of his have you read? And I was like, well, I haven't read any of his stuff, but I've seen his movies, and they're just, not that great. I like The Shining, but that's it. And this guy's like, You have no idea. You have no idea. And so he goes, he reaches down and he picks one up. It's called A Change of Seasons or Different Seasons. He goes, while we're waiting, pick a story in here, just read a couple pages. I guarantee you're going to become a Stephen King fan. Something like that, right? We're waiting for his brother like 20 minutes. So I start flipping through and I read this story called The Body, which is the story they made the movie Stand By Me out of.
Right.
It's a great Rob Reiner directed film.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in that movie became big stars, right? But it was so well written and so unlike the visual portrayals of his stuff that I had seen on screen, right? And so from that moment, I was like, holy cow. So I asked so his brother's ready. I'm like, okay, can I borrow this book? He's like, dude, when you let somebody borrow a book, it's basically a gift. So I was like, okay, you'll get it back. Sure enough, man, I took it. Excuse me, that weekend, I think I read it cover to cover. I don't remember all the stories in it, but I remember that one a lot because, like I said, it became a movie later on. But it just put a hook in me that when you say somebody's a good writer, it's like they appeal to you. And it's a little harder to say what is it about their writing that appeals to you, right? But with him, it was just the way he portrayed young boys at that age. I was like, I was a young boy once. I know that's a lot of what that stuff's like. Their hopes, their fears, their aspirations, and then how their lives end up. The bonding experiences, the opening up and opening up of a feeling and sharing that with the reader, not necessarily the kids sharing feelings with each other, although they did do that in that story. And it was just like, wow, even walking through the woods or walking on the railroad tracks, crap that kids say to each other and do. I'd never seen anything like that before. And so that hooked me. What was it about Carrie that opened your eyes to Stephen King?
I think the fact that she was a teenager and that at a time before when bullying wasn't what it is today, when bullying was considered okay, that it made sense back then,
Well,
and I
sure caught on.
the next book I actually read by him was The Stand.
Now, The Stand's a big one. Is that his longest book?
That's his longest book, and
how many
probably
pages?
read it 35 times now since
Wow, really?
1979. So I had a copy when I was in the Navy, and I took it wherever we went. So when there was nothing else going on the ship and you're just got downtime, I'd pick it up. So sometimes I'd read it 2 times within a few months.
Mm.
So, it quickly became my favorite. And I think it's the thing about Stephen King is his descriptions sometimes for some people, they get tired of them. When he describes the outlet in a room that you've just walked into, people are like, I don't need to know that. But I think every little description of his comes back at some point on you.
Well, he tends to, let's put it this way. He can be super sharp and articulate and make every word count, even though there's a lot of them. And then there's times where he just seems like he's going on and on for no reason.
Oh, yeah.
When I was reading, so I saw the movie The Shining, and then later I read the book. I'm like, there's all kinds of stuff in the book that it just seemed like he was putting in there just to put in there. It didn't resonate with me, but I'd seen the movie, so I'm kind of watching the movie as I read the book in my head, right? But I always try to take the tack of, if I hadn't seen it yet, if I know anything about the story, if I hadn't seen the movie yet, I'd had a different experience, and maybe those side streets would have been my favorites. And I think that's what a lot of people do say. In my own writing, I do a lot of that too, where if you're writing a detective story, you kind of got to go down a few side streets that are red herrings.
Right.
Before I did that, I wrote some family humor stuff. And you're probably old enough to remember the old Family Circus cartoons in the Sunday paper.
Right.
Excuse me, where they'd have Billy needs to go from here to here, and Billy would go, all over the neighborhood, and pet the dog and say hi to the neighbor and play on the swing, and then eventually maybe not remember. And that was how my stories would go, because with a humor story, it's more about the journey than the destination. It's not about whether we actually go from I got to return these jars to Target, and I'm taking my daughter, and we see this guy with a big belly and a white beard and a red shirt, and it's 6 weeks till Christmas. And my daughter's jumping out of her, she's 4 or 5, she's jumping out of her chair. Dad, it's Santa Claus. And I'm like, what? And I see this guy, I'm like, dude, what are you doing walking around 6 weeks before Christmas looking like that? And I thought he's probably auditioning to be their in-store Santa. And then I thought, or he's just not having a good time giving kids a thrill. Either way, it's kind of cool. So she and I played. I played along. She was fixated, and we stalked that poor guy. And of course, I think he knew, because at one point, the pinnacle of that little story is, we're trying to find him going up and down the aisles, and sometimes we see him, and she's nervous, doesn't want to talk to him, and then finally he comes around a corner where we're standing, and she's just frozen. Her eyes are this big. He says hi, and I can't remember what I said. I said, are we going to be getting a visit from you soon? He goes, I think so, if you're good. Something like that, just something real innocuous. And he just goes on about his day. And she was just floored, So it was more of the beginning of the story is I got to return these jars to Target. And then we're playing soccer in Target, down in the sporting goods department, and all this other stuff. And lo and behold, there's Santa Claus there. So it's all about everything except, returning the jars. So the side streets are fun depending on the story, but for a lot of people, that's what makes the story.
And I'm like that. I always want the main characters to be there, but I like the little segues into the minor characters that might show up more. And I mean, I know we're going to talk about your books, and your Double Blind series is the only thing I've read, but there is a part of that I've enjoyed. So, especially it's Tyree and the private investigators, because that's not part of the actual storyline, but it's important.
Well, Tyree and Big Brass. So here's a little behind the scenes thing. When I first started out to write that story, it was going to be Tyree's book. It was going to be his story. And I thought, what do I want? I want one of those disgraced knights kind of thing. A knight who fell out of good standing in his prior position and now is roaming the countryside looking to do good deeds to earn his reputation back or whatever. So that was kind of the Tyree character. He got ran out of Texas by standing up and doing the right thing, so it makes him sympathetic. Then he's over here and he's drawn into doing this other stuff that he isn't really wanting to do, and he ends up being an important role in it. It was going to be his book. That was going to be that book. And my friend who was writing murder mysteries and police procedurals was like, well, that's a detective story. You set out to write a more police procedural. And when I started the story, I was like, okay, I'll start it with a murder, make that interesting, and then I'll bring in the detectives who have to look at it, and then eventually I'll bring in Tyree. So one of my beta critique partners, she's reading along, and I'm sending her each chapter as I finish. And I don't know, we were 4 or 5 chapters into it. And she goes, so this book's supposed to be about Tyree. We're 5 chapters in, and he's not here yet. What's going on? I was like, honestly, I'm having so much fun with these other characters. Maybe it's not Tyree's book. So it started out, it was going to be about him, and he became a secondary player. A lot of people have said that book is two storylines that happen to converge, which it is. But I really almost wrote it like 2 books. I was over here with Carly and Sergio, and then I'd be over here on a different day writing Tyree, jump back and forth. And of course, then Big Brass, who ends up working with Tyree, they both kind of resurface a little bit. They're kind of referenced in other books, but I would say they didn't have as big of a role in other books as they did in the first book, because it becomes Carly and Sergio's series.
That's the neat thing about the Double Blind series that I noticed. You had fun with Carly and Sergio.
Yeah,
you had they come across as the writer sitting there going, I got to do this with them, and now I got to do this with them, and I gotta, because I don't want to give anything away, but I got to do this in order to get them to this place. And just that friendship that it comes through. I like it when a writer has a piece of them in there. And I think probably you have a friendship with a woman that's just a really good friendship. That's who she is. She's your good friend, and you can talk to her and stuff. And that's the way that comes across.
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times. I wrote a story. It was originally called Poggy Boncy, and then I is about a trip to Italy. This guy goes on a trip to Italy, and it's a romance, but basically he goes there with his family. It's a business trip, and it all falls apart. And he fights with his wife, and she goes home. He's got to stay there to do business for like a month, and he ends up having this affair. And he really falls for this Italian lady, and she really falls for him. And then at the end, it's like, what am I doing? This is wrong. Basically, not to give it away, but again, it's about the journey, not so much the details there. He sees a funeral where an old man has died, and his whole family, generations of his family are there, and he's like, I'm not going to have that because of what I'm doing. What's wrong with me? And he just has that moment. And he thinks about his own father's funeral, how there were so many cars and how many people came. And he's like, that won't be the case with me. I don't live that kind of life. And right now I'm making sure my family won't be there. I need to, this is all wrong. And he just has his epiphany. And of course he loses it all. He loses his job, he loses his wife, so to speak. And he goes home and they reconcile, and she takes him back. And it's comedy, right? But it's got a lot of sex in it. It's funny, it's dramatic. There's parts where you cry. But in that story, where I had a lot of fun was he has an assistant. She's back home while he's in Italy. And she just gives him crap all day, up one side and down the other. She is his staunchest ally, but she holds his feet to the fire. And she's like, that guy over there is driving a Porsche. Nobody on our team is driving a Porsche, Mike. And he's like, well, yeah, I got college to pay for. She goes, but there's no Porsche, And so she's just like that. And her name is Sam. And so she's the kind of person everybody likes, that says whatever, no filter, is always funny, is always witty, is always busting chops, and kind of the life of the party, and definitely gets carried away. So I wrote that story. That book didn't do well, right? But I thought what I enjoyed most was those scenes with Sam and Mike, where they're bantering and talking, because they are good friends, and because he doesn't usually say things to her that are super funny. He's more the straight man in the comedy duo, but she says all kinds of funny things. She's outrageous. And so I thought, okay, that was fun. But who wouldn't want to go to work with a best friend and have a best friend at work who's upbeat and funny and just have that great dynamic? And so I just kind of turned it around a little bit, and I said, okay, Sergio is going to be a little more of the funnier type, although Carly certainly has her moments. And it's not a comedy, right? But he makes quips and things like that. But that they're really, really good friends. And that I wanted, just from the opening, scenes where they work together, that they just have a rapport. They just know each other. They act like they know, like almost like brother and sister, kind of, in some regards. And I'm glad to hear that came through, because that was something I really wanted in that story.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm thoroughly in love with the entire Sergio Carly saga.
Yeah, they're a little dynamic. So which of those books have you read? Did you read all three now?
I've read all three now.
So you're waiting for me like everybody else to produce?
Yeah, I'm waiting for Fourth Estate.
Yeah.
I did pre-order it, so but I'm one of those ones when it comes to waiting on the next book in a series. I'm ultra patient.
Really?
Because
you read The Stand 35 times. You're definitely patient.
But at the same time, I don't want the writer to rush something just because the reader's waiting on it. Because if you rush it, then we may not get everything you want, or we may not get what you intended for us to get if it's rushed.
I think if a writer rushes, he or she knows they rushed it, and they're going to feel bad about it. And then that book's out there forever. It's like, you know what? If it's an extra week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. I mean, a year is maybe too much. If it's just, but I actually in a recent newsletter, I said I'm slated to put out like 2 books by the end of the year. I said it's doable, but I said I'm going to give you a heads up. Fourth Estate's going to get written. The other one may or may not, and feel free to go ahead and cancel your pre-order now, because I don't want to be in a position where I feel like I'm rushing. I may work fast and get it done, but a lot of times when the beta readers, before I send it to the beta readers, I'm taking like a week off, and I'm running on the treadmill, or I'm washing the dishes or mowing the lawn or whatever, and an idea comes to me. And one of them was in Primary Target. That story ended. Again, a little spoiler alert if you haven't read it. but you've read it, so I can do this. So I mentioned that I have a hard time talking about Primary Target because I purposely was very obscure about who the killer was. So I had to refer to the killer a lot as the killer, right? Which is, there are people who read that opening chapter, which is about the killer, and they're like, this is poorly written. And I worked really hard on the killers, the scenes where you're in the killer's point of view, because it's hard not to use words that start to tip off who it is. I really wanted it to be unknown. There were clues, but I wanted you to not get these obvious clues. I wanted you to work for these other less obvious clues, kind of thing. And then when I do the little reveal, it's like, wow, kind of, that was the goal, right? So at the end,
it was definitely a wow moment.
yeah, well, that's the fun of it. You send this out to people, and I'm like, hey, I'll put like on a beta reader copy at the end of each chapter. Some I don't do this all the time because they don't like it, but at the end of each chapter, I put like 3 or 4 questions. Who do you think the killer is? How am I doing so far? Are there any scenes in here that are slow? And they usually bite back, no, everything's fine. I think, but what I love is, I love this. As the beta readers are reading, and I'm just saying, just be honest, this helps me. Kind of like our conversation today. It's like you're giving me marketing feedback, right? So as much as they hate stopping at the end of each chapter to answer questions, because it really breaks up the flow of the book, it's like, it was just a handful of questions. They were pretty much the same questions every time. But every time a new character came into the book, 80% of the people thought that's the killer. That's like somebody who answers the phone across the street, like, that's the killer over there. That was hilarious. See, as an author, I had no idea. You guys are suspecting every single person as they come on. That's the killer. And it changed every chapter. They're like, when I think it's this person, when I think it's that person. It was hilarious.
It's out of the 3 so far, Primary Target is definitely my favorite.
Primary Target is my favorite because I think it had the most interesting villain. And so what I was going to say about that was the original ending was, we'll just paint broadly and say the bad guy, what do you want to say? The villain got caught, died, there was a fire, died that way. So you're putting a nice little bow on everything ties up. You got that ending chapter where it's like, okay, all these different problems, they're all solved now, and the heroes ride off to the sunset until they return in their next book, right? And I was talking to an author friend of mine, and we were talking about whatever, and I like to lay things out a certain way or point you in a certain direction, and then yank the carpet out from under you. So you're thinking in Killer in the Dark, the Jett Thacker book, I really make you hate the sheriff, the local sheriff. So you're thinking maybe the local sheriff is the killer. And you find out late in the game, no, it's just a guy he's just a hard ass, and he's actually trying to get rid of drugs that are happening in his town. He thinks his little Florida town is what do you call it, like a stopover route for the drug mules, and that's why he's cracking down so hard. But everybody thinks he's the killer for 80% of the book because he just does so many things. He says so many things to make you dislike him. He acts in a belligerent manner to everybody. So I like setting things up a certain way, and then that's not it. And then you're like, okay, well, if it's not him, then who is it? Well, in Primary Target, like I said, I was talking to somebody about how I like to turn them around. I said, wouldn't it be a neat curveball if the villain got away in this one? And she was like, yeah, that would, because you don't expect, you got your hero cops. And in book 1, they solved the case. In book 2, they're convinced they solved the case, and they didn't. They got duped. Book 3, they solved the case. So it's a nice little shell game. But so I bounced that idea. I was like, we were just having a conversation. I go, yeah, it'd be pretty neat. And she goes, how would you do that? Because she dies in the fire. It wouldn't be that hard. I said, she's such a manipulative piece of garbage that I just have to write 1 or 2 things earlier in the story about how she's done this and did that, and then have a couple of conversations where the reader at the time won't know what those conversations are about. But by the time it all happens, you'll like, oh, that's what that was. And then the final scene, whereas it says the ants crawled up her spine, I was like, to me, that was spiking the ball in the end zone. I was like, people are either going to love that or hate it. This is going to flush my career down the toilet, or they're going to be like, wow, this guy's good. So for me, it was like, it made everybody be like, wait a minute, what? And then they're like, ah. And I think there was only one review that said, I didn't understand it. Everybody says what a great ending was. I didn't understand the ending. So I'm like, okay, 800 reviews, only one of them said they didn't get it. I think I did okay on that one.
Yeah, I know about when I was finishing Primary Target, it was probably late at night, and I actually belted out, "What are you got? What in the world? What have you done?" And it was that joy of, hey, that was a great ending,
and that's
you messed with my mind, and my wife probably jumped 3 feet in the air because she was reading it was quiet, and but that's what I like. I like that kind of. I like to be surprised. I didn't read a lot of mysteries for a long time, and because I was always into the psychological thriller or the action thriller, and recently I've started picking up mysteries again, and of course with the Double Blind series, I got detective, action, and a mystery to solve. So it worked.
It's interesting that you say that, because of the 3 series that I have, the Gamma Sequence is billed as a medical thriller, but it's much more action oriented. Double Blind is much more police procedural murder mystery, and Jett Thacker is supposed to be more of a psychological thriller. Fewer deaths and more suspense and thinking about what happened here and how we solve the case, kind of thing. And my daughter asked me, she goes, Dad, why do you always, she's 12 now, she goes, Dad, why do you always write stories where people get killed? I'm like, because those are the ones that sell, honey. And the ones that sell the best are, the murder mysteries, Double Blind series, because maybe because they have the most murders, I don't know.
Do you find that being able to write and kill people is an outlet?
Probably not. People, like, I did a TikTok video about, people are a little worried when they find out you write murder mysteries, because like they kind of think, what's going on inside that head? It's like, it's just imagination. I write down something that would scare me or something that would thrill me. Like in the opening scene of one of the books, there's a guy, a trucker, who's there late at night, alone on a loading dock. Nothing scary about that. He's not scared of anything. He's oblivious. But the reader sees the killer is there with a knife watching this guy, and there's nobody else around. And the killer is nervous. And so for me, that's like, you're walking through a parking lot, like close to 9 o'clock in like December, where it gets dark at 6, and for whatever reason, you parked way out there and there's no other, so maybe not December, maybe November. There's no other cars around, and you just get that weird little hairs on the back of your neck kind of thing. You're looking around, it's like there's somebody over there, doesn't look quite right, and you just kind of steer a little more this way. And so I just kind of like to take the little things that would make me nervous or a little off balance or whatever, that probably we've all experienced, and try to fold that into a story and put the reader there so that the reader experiences that, or the reader relates to us, like, yeah, I know what that's like. I've been in maybe not that situation, but something similar. And try to paint that in that way to make the reader feel like they're there, kind of thing.
Okay.
But they're like, I don't know, is it an outlet? Like, nah, it's just fun. It's like getting on a roller coaster. And then you got to be creative. It's like, all right, well, I already had somebody die this way, this way, this way. So now I got to think of something creative or it's not interesting. And there's, gazillion murder mysteries written every year. So it's like, oh, whatever creative thing I come up with, somebody got beat to death with a jug of Kool-Aid. Somebody probably already wrote that because there's so many of them out there, But yeah, I just try to roll with what would be interesting for me to read as a reader or see on screen as a movie watcher, or has bothered me in some way, shape, or form, and just kind of express that, because I think the emotional aspects of all this stuff, the more personal you make something, the more universal it is. Like the audience doesn't have to, as somebody said, maybe it's Spielberg or somebody, go, the audience doesn't have to believe the monster is real. The audience has to believe the characters believe the monster is real. And then the characters get scared, and so the reader is scared for the characters. You know, they're vicariously experiencing that emotion. That's what I try to do in my stories.
Well, it comes through. It does. I mean, I'm just from the Double Blind series alone, you get that feeling. And I keep going back to Primary Target because it was my favorite. But yeah, the way we go in and out of the villain's head was one of the, not sure I've actually ever read one like that. So, you know, that's something for yourself. You found a way to get inside the reader's head and put them in another head. And to me, that was very interesting.
Yeah, well, and then if you look at Double Blind, where you have a complete psychopath is the killer there, that guy. So a different situation where he starts out, and the more you learn about him, the more out there you find out he is. And but you do a lot of research on psychopath, and it's like, to a certain extent, like taking a souvenir from the body. I didn't know they did stuff like that. So I'm doing this research. And it's like, holy cow, okay, well, I'll have the killer take a souvenir. And then why they kill again is because it's like the urge builds and builds and builds and they can't resist. So I'm like, okay, well then I'll express that. But the part where I got somebody wrote me an email saying, so at one point I had the killer, he's just like at home, he's like shaved his whole body and he's howling at the moon and just, and they were like, so they were paying me a compliment. They're like, that is so far out there. How did you ever think to do something like that? And I said, I was just kind of having a conversation with myself where I was like, I'm a normal person. You're a normal person. What the heck would strike us as just flat out freaking crazy? And I said, let me think about what that would be. And then what would be after that? What would be after that? And I'll just have this guy go do that. I like he shaves his whole body. He stands in front of a mirror with a knife. He shaves his whole body. I'm like, that if you found your best friend did that, you'd be like, okay, maybe it's time for me to head home. You know, I just tried to think of the most bizarre the things that I would find bizarre. And I thought it'll come off as bizarre because that's how I'm going to portray it. And who the heck would stand in their garage and shave their whole body and he cuts himself all over the place, you know.
So that's the nice thing about writing fiction, though, because there is no, you can't do this because it's fiction. No, I can do that. I can go outside the laws of physics if I want to, because it's
depending on the fiction, yeah. Because if you start out, so I have a fantasy I just released, right here, Water Castle, right? Just released this, right? Talk about Stephen King style. That's a big, thick phone book there. For those of you who don't know what a phone book is, we used to look up phone numbers not online. We printed them out, and they were thick. So in that one, I was writing, and again, one of my critique partners, I was talking about having a dragon and doing some other stuff, and she goes, you know, you kind of can't because the world you've built is a real world that's just in the past, and the mystical side of it is really just people kind of doing a shell game. They're pretending to be mystics. They are not really mystics. So you kind of can't have a dragon because we don't have dragons. But she was saying kind of the parameter of the world you built doesn't allow for that. But she goes, but if you had laid it out where anything is possible, which I didn't, then yeah, you could have a dragon. I was like, oh, good point. Because then if I had introduced the dragon, a lot of people who were with me up to that point were like, nah, this is getting a little bizarre here. And even though it's a fantasy, you know, it's a romantic fantasy, but it's like, okay, we'll allow this step because you created that and you explained that and it makes sense in this world you built. But this other stuff probably isn't going to fly. And I was like, hard to argue with that. It was a good critique to get to keep the story on track and focused. And you know, at the end of the day, the thing's 650 pages long. I'm not sure it needed, you know, another 100 pages where we're dealing with dragons and stuff.
We get to have a dragon.
wasn't Game of Thrones.
Yeah, but that'll never be finished probably. So you're probably better off.
Too. Did you read those books?
No, I haven't. I've got them.
The first one.
So, but and I've watched part of the HBO series when they put it out, but
I came late to the game on that with the TV show, well, the series, right, the HBO series. Which I don't know, has it been 10 years or something since they started that thing? Because it ran forever.
It's been a while now, yeah.
I don't remember what I was doing, but all of a sudden it was like it was in the air. Just a lot of people were talking about it. I'm like, okay. So it was definitely in the first season, maybe 4 or 5 shows in, and we tuned. I'm like, wow, that's pretty wild. And a lot of like we were talking about, you set up a certain thing, you're kind of rooting for this guy, and all of a sudden he dies. It's like, wow, how about that? And actually, that was probably so maybe that was towards the end of the first season. There was so much talk online about I can't believe they did that. As a storyteller, I'm like, well, I got to check this out. How do all these people get hooked in and then enjoying the surprise, you know? Which in one of my stories, I created a character that everybody liked, and I end up I do that a lot. I try to make you like the characters before I kill them. But I had one that everybody thought was going to be hanging around and didn't. And the volume of so you can put out a series and you'll see the volume of sales. Let's just say I sell 100 copies of book one, 100 of book two, maybe 80 of book three. That's some those will be high. Nobody goes 100% of your readers of book one go to book two. That's not right. But let's just say it's 80 or 90% of the people who read book one go to book two, 80 or 90% go to book three. And then after that, it's going to be pretty high because they like the series, they're going to stick with it. So if you have a big drop off, like I do in one of my series, I'm not double blind, where it goes from like only 50% of the people, or maybe it's less than that, but it's around 50% go from book one to book two. And it's because I didn't know it at the time, but I killed off a character. I thought we gotta keep you on your feet, gotta keep you guessing. And they didn't like that, get rid of that character. Now, if they read book two, they hung around for the rest of the series, but there's a big drop off between book one and book two. But then also, in my defense, I was loving that Game of Thrones thing. And I'm like, all right, in this other book, and I won't tell you which one, I was like, I'm gonna kill a bunch of characters so that none of these characters is safe. So in the first book of the series, let's say there's kind of like 2 heroes and one gets killed, but not in the first book. They get killed later in the second book. Then after that, there's some other people you've met. And then in a different book, a lot of them get killed. So now you're like, holy cow. And then it becomes where it's like, okay, it's this one and this one. So one character makes it all the way through. And early in the series, meets another character who also makes it all the way through. And they meet a few others who make it all the way through. And by the end of the series, you're fine picking up the book knowing everybody I like is going to be okay. They all get home safe. But it was a tough lesson to learn from book one to book two, where it's like, don't do that. We don't like it.
I think a lot of authors have that happen to them. Go along reading a series and oh my gosh, how could they do this to me? I think I've been lucky. The authors I've discovered in the last, let's just say 5 years, they haven't done that to me.
And you gotta be careful who you pick up. But so what types you mentioned that you mostly are reading murder mysteries now?
With just finishing up Double Blind, right before that, I've just finished up Sue Coletta, her Grafton County series,
which was
more psychological thriller.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. But right before that, I finished J.C. Fuller's Rockfish Island Mysteries. And that really is what told me I need to get back into mystery a little bit because I like the way she wrote. She has an Agatha Christie style to her writing.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you this small town and something's going to happen, but I'm not going to let you know, and I enjoyed that. So I've gotten back into that.
We had Sue on the podcast, Sue Coletta, and she was talking about she's going soon to fly to Georgia to be interviewed for a crime show. She's the author, stringing together some information behind the scenes of it's like a real they call it real crime, true crime kind of show. Right. And she's got this course about serial killers and stuff. I mean, she's hardcore.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's actually, I was off for a week back in July. My daughter was at a conference out in Colorado, and my wife and I we were basically, degenerates for a week because we didn't have to worry about anything other than our animals. And I picked up Sue's Mayhem series and blew through 5 books in a week.
Wow.
Just maybe a little longer, but I mean, it was. My wife actually she said, you need to read these. she writes like Stephen King. And I went, no, don't, nobody writes like Stephen King. And I had to eat my words. I did, because I was so entranced with this visceral images that she creates in her books. And then, I guess you could say my wife and her and myself, we become TikTok friends. We converse, my wife and her converse back and forth. And just that whole thing with her going to this true crime thing, and the amount of research that she does. And I know I can
She is a
tell
researcher. Yeah.
it's what she likes, because I actually told her that one time, just in a private message. I didn't want to put it on my book review because I didn't want to give anything away.
Yeah.
But I was just telling her the amount of research, and she goes, "But that's what I like. I like that part of it." So it was a great journey, to do that. And I said in the book review for you that makes you feel like you're walking down the street with the characters. And not to give anything big away, I was in a car with Sergio at a certain point, and I could feel that. And it was the same thing with Sue. She puts you inside the mind of a killer, and it's just, and I actually did, when I did my first review, I said, yes, she writes visceral images like Stephen King and prose like Shakespeare. And it's that there's an emotional tie there, and when I get tied in emotionally to a book or to a series, then I actually start to get impatient when the next book doesn't come out real fast, because
Yeah.
I need to fix. It's like being an addict.
We're all almost that way, where it's like we're binge watching TV shows and people want to binge watch or binge read books. I actually had somebody email me and say, this looks like a really good series. I'm going to wait till you're finished with it, and then I'm just going to read them all at once. I was like, yeah, I can understand that. I don't appreciate that, but I can certainly understand it. Wouldn't hurt to start them now, buy them now, just wait and then read them all at once. But I totally get how that is. And kind of, so let's say, I do my writing all day, and then if I just want to relax and be a little mindless, I'll put on a TV show. And sometimes it's research stuff. Like I'll bring up the internet and watch stuff on serial killers or whatever. And sometimes it's a true crime show, just because sometimes some of the stuff that real killers do is just not something a normal person would think to do, like their habits or whatever it was. Like everybody's heard of Ted Bundy, and he's a rapist, he's a murderer, but just charming guy. And it's like that's scarier. You kind of want your monsters to look like monsters. You don't want your monsters to look charming and friendly and be outgoing, and so those are those little things that sometimes I'm like, wow. So, and then again, in the Killer with a Primary Target, I wanted to fold some of those aspects in of a charming killer and a smart. And I think that's my smartest. It's not my smartest villain, but as far as like regular people go, it's my smartest. It is my smartest villain. I have another villain who theoretically is smarter, because the type of position they got themselves into implies that they're obviously very smart. So in other words, you might think somebody who is a billionaire and in charge of a multinational corporation is probably a pretty smart person. Okay. Since my villain in Primary Target was not that, you could reasonably say, well, this villain was not as smart as that villain. But as far as day-to-day tricking you, fooling you, that kind of stuff, the villain in Primary Target was definitely the smartest. And that's fun to write. It's fun to write a smart villain.
Definitely a very cunning villain. That I think that was the thing. Be able to use everything that pops up around this villain to their benefit.
Yeah, even where one of the things I liked was, I was like, what a piece of crap the villain was that I think she's going to take the boss out for lunch or whatever, and she smashes out her taillight first so she can blame it on somebody else. I was like, I got that idea from something that happened in real life, from I don't remember if it was a murderer who did that or something. It was unrelated, right? I was like, wow, you would do something like that. And I was like, although on the other hand, that's cool. That's operating on another level. I'm gonna break my own tail light out so I can blame it on somebody else. I just wouldn't, part of me says I wouldn't think to do that, but of course I did think to do that. So,
No,
but
that was, and actually in all of them. I mean, in Double Blind, it was just that the viciousness
yeah.
that really, and that sucked me in. So once I finished that, that was now I have to go right on to Primary Target.
And what's funny is some people have said Primary Target is their favorite one in that series. Now, I can understand if Double Blind is not somebody's favorite because, like I said, if you like Tyree, he's only kind of in the first book. He's in the second book, but it's a way reduced role. And if you like Carly and Sergio, they're the main characters in the other book. So it makes sense that with that dual story kind of thing in Double Blind, that there's nothing wrong with the book. It's not a bad book, but I can understand why it's not the favorite for people. Primary Target in that series is my favorite because it's such a great villain and in my opinion, a bang up of an ending. But a lot of people have said they like Third Degree the best. And I was like, I appreciate that you like the book because I try to write a quality product every time. And, each book that you write, hopefully you're getting better, but I understand why people like it, but I wouldn't think if you read all three that Third Degree is your favorite. But a fair number of people have said it was.
And that's the nice thing about anybody who gets into any series. You might have 10 people all read the same 3 books. 5 of them like Primary Target the most. 4 of them like Third Degree the most, but there's that one going, no, Double Blind was the best, and that's the nice thing, because when we start, I think reading especially and the love of books and different types of stories is the one place where we are still allowed to agree to disagree.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. Well,
Because
they say an author is responsible for what he or she writes, but not what the reader reads. So you come to my story, I'm writing my story a certain way, and I'm sending out the message that I think I'm sending out. And you come to it, you're in a bad mood, you're in a great mood, you had a stress going on, maybe a parent dying with cancer. Any different mindset can be in somebody's head when they pick up that book, and then they're going to like it or dislike it accordingly. Or if they stick it all the way through, they're going to like different aspects of the book. Like we said, some people like those side streets, and some people find the side streets a complete distraction. Just stay on the focus of the main thing, and you can't control. You can't control.
that was the one thing in Third Degree I think I missed was a little bit of that side street, and and it got to me thinking, because I can ask you then, is there a branch off that might happen for them? Will Tyree find his own paths in a different book?
So, so speaking of Tyree, yeah, when I laid out the series, so first I write the first book, and it's a one and done because I had written a romance, a time travel adventure, family humor, and I was kind of trying different things to see which one I enjoyed the best and which one would do the best. And a friend suggested I should write a murder mystery. So I had a couple of author friends I was critique partners with at that time, good writers. And I was bouncing around ideas, and I kind of came up with this idea. And the idea was Tyree, but also this murder mystery. And he ends up kind of solving it, right? But on the backdrop of these Tampa cops. And then when I started into it, like I said, I was having a lot of fun with the Tampa cops. So it was just really easy to step back and say, okay, I'm going to have parallel stories. They need to run into each other, and then they need to converge, which was not that hard to do. But Tyree himself appears in a earlier book, so he's a second time appearance. He was in a book called An Angel on My Shoulder, and that's a paranormal thriller. Now that one, if you read Stephen King, most people think Stephen King, they think the horror stories, but a lot of stuff that Stephen King wrote, like Shawshank Redemption, not a horror story. And he's written a lot of stuff. He's written murder mysteries now. A lot of stuff that he's written is not. But his main claim to fame, why he's top of the charge, was he was the king of horror for, I don't know, 20 years probably. So it's people like me who end up reading something that's not horror of his that become a fan, and then it's, you know, it's a different ballgame. But so when I wrote An Angel on Her Shoulder, which it was originally called An Angel on Her Shoulder, and then we retitled it as A Place of Shadows. It's about a family that has a little husband and wife, young husband and wife, who think their young child, about 4 or 5 year old girl, is possessed, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with this kid and what's going on around us. Is this kid bringing these, somehow manifesting these evil things to start appearing in our lives? And the main character in that, I think his name is Doug, was originally Dan. Doug reaches out and finds Tyree. Tyree comes in and kind of helps out and helps solve the problem for the family. So he's a very righteous, you know, straight arrow, black and white kind of guy in that book, with a sense of humor. You know, he understands when the bullets are flying. It's like, yeah, do we have a foxhole around here somewhere we could crawl into? And his role is to support the main character. Like suffice it to say, Tyree could have solved the problem, but Tyree's role was to show the main character that you can solve that problem, kind of thing, without getting too much into it. Well, that book was very favorably compared to stuff that Stephen King writes, because a lot of what I did in that book was flashbacks to when the main character was a kid and some of the people he encountered. And he had this kind of ability to not really read people's minds, but kind of get an impression of what was the internal workings were going on. This little kid, and they were playing in a park, and there was an abandoned car down there. So they're, you know, smashing the windows. It's an abandoned old junker car. They're smashing windows, and they're, you know, pulling off the mirrors and trying to, you know, reflect the light around. And the owner of the car shows up. He's like cussing and swearing. He's drunk, and the kid is looking at him. And he sees the thoughts of the drunk guy, that he's got like a billy club under his seat, and that he's thinking about getting, because he's yelling at these kids because he thinks these little kids stole his car. They didn't, but he doesn't know that. And he's thinking about getting his billy club and wailing on them. And so the kid sees that that's a thought this guy's having, and he's like, "We got to get out of here." And they're like, "We didn't do anything." And they're like, "We got to get out of here right now." And, you know, so little things like that happen to him. So you kind of find out that what the little girl is manifesting is really this part of this ability that he had, that he talked himself out of believing that he had. You know, it's like if you're 5 years old and you have an imaginary dog, nobody cares. If you're 30 years old and you have an imaginary dog, you get locked up. And so somewhere along the line, you just realize, I'm not going to talk about that. That doesn't exist. I don't do that. And maybe eventually you actually kill that ability off, just, you know, from, you know, what do you call it? Use it or lose it, you know, just atrophies. Right. And so she's manifesting it. And he'd forgotten all these things from when he was a kid, because he suppressed them. He meets a voodoo woman who kind of does a seance kind of deal with him and says, "You're the problem. She's experiencing what you experienced. You've got to make that connection. You've got to make this stop," kind of thing. And wow. So it's a, you know, it's a paranormal thriller, but a lot of people saw that his little flashbacks from when he would be 10 years old and things he saw and did as a 10-year-old were a lot like things they saw in Stand By Me. And they're like, "Yeah, you write a lot like Stephen King. You're not afraid to jump around and really dive deep for something that at the moment doesn't look related." And we find out, oh my gosh, this is what this whole thing's been about the whole time. So it was fun. And, you know, I got to draw on a lot of real life experiences, you know, because that actually did happen. We went to the park one day, and there was an abandoned car, you know, like, well, you know, some stuff we did as kids.
That's the thing. I think if when you can relate to somebody else's life, the book's going to become more enjoyable to them. You know, it's not. So you want the escape. You know, I do when I read. I want an escape. I don't want reality, because we have to live reality. I want something
reality all day.
Yeah. So, but if I can read a book and go, boy, that sounds like something that happened when I was a kid, you know, and you were saying it with the body. Yeah. I grew up 30 minutes outside the Bronx, is where I actually grew up. And
I saw the New York Yankees shirt there.
Yeah, and it's all over my walls, and so. But we used to hop the train to places, or we would, try to cross the train tracks before the trains came through, so
Yeah.
I could relate, to that stupid side of being a kid and doing
We've
that kind
all
of
done
stuff,
that, haven't we?
and that's opens that up. But now when I read stories, sometimes I want, to understand that even the adult does stupid things because, we still do them.
Uh,
So,
well, one thing I wanted to ask you about was,
okay.
so your wife's a pretty avid reader. Does
Hmm.
she typically recommend a book to you or vice versa?
That's how I ended up reading you.
Well, I knew that because you told me that in one of our
Hmm.
messages back and forth.
And yeah, sometimes she'll recommend something to me, and then I'll try it out. And that's actually how I read your books. And I mentioned Sue Coletta and J.C. Fuller. If she hadn't recommended them, I don't know if I would have just went out and found them.
So she read all that stuff and recommended it to you.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
cool because if I recommend a book and then later on I rec another book and then I rec another book, then it's like, oh, I like this one, I don't like that one, I don't like that one. You're starting with that feedback, you're starting to let me know, oh, he more prefers this. Then when I come across one like that, then I'm like, yeah, I think you'll like this one. That feedback makes it a lot more accurate when I make a recommendation for you. So she probably knows you're pretty good by now as far as
Oh yeah, yeah.
what
She
your taste.
knows what I'll sit down and I'll enjoy before even if I don't know if I enjoy that, but
How do you
she
mostly
knows.
consume books? Paperback, hardcover, ebooks, audiobooks?
Mostly Kindle.
Mostly
Um,
Kindle, yeah.
yeah.
That's easy. Are you in Kindle Unlimited and you just go through whatever you want?
Actually, we used to, but we stopped that. We figured if we read the book and liked it enough, we wanted to actually purchase it. And it especially anymore with the independent authors, and who I didn't even know really existed
Yeah.
until Book Talk became something that my wife was in, and she's going, "Well, these people self-publish," and I'm like, "What does that even mean?" But so now to buy the book and support the author when I like something, and I mean, I know that Kindle Unlimited pays, but I want the author to, I know I got that, and it's part of my collection.
Well,
At
Kindle
one time we
Unlimited is
had,
good because, well, obviously it's an Amazon product. So Amazon pushes their products, at least in my
right.
opinion, they do. So Kindle Unlimited is good because if you sign up for a service, you can use as much or as little as you want. And that's like the ease of use thing. Books, even an expensive book, is really not a major purchase. It's about as expensive as a Starbucks coffee, right? So it tends to be more of an impulse buy, although obviously if somebody's bought a couple of your books, they tend to be a pretty steady customer from that point on. And so I don't worry about that too much. And I wasn't in Kindle Unlimited in the beginning just because I didn't really understand it. And friends of mine were like, no, 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 you'll end up making half your money from this if you get into it, but it pays like 4/10 of a cent per page read, right? It's not a lot. So it's almost like 10 people have to read the book in Kindle Unlimited to make what you would make if one person bought it. But since Amazon pushes their products, they tend to push um, to people who are in Kindle Unlimited to sample more things. And I guess the mindset is since I'm already paying for the service, why not sample more? Kind of like when
Right.
you go to a buffet, it's like, I normally wouldn't order that. It's not going to cost me anything extra. I might as well try it. And then you try some oddball thing, and you're like, hey, that's pretty good. So now you have a new favorite from that sampling. And people who are in Kindle Unlimited tend to be volume readers. They tend to read a lot of books. But I've also found what you just said is true. People like the ownership aspect of it. So I've had people say, I found you on Kindle Unlimited, a friend of mine. They recommend things that other people who like what you like, so they'll recommend it to you. That makes sense. So it was recommended, so I checked it out. I liked it. Then I liked it so much that I bought the ebook. Then I wanted to sign the paperback. I'm like, you're a great customer. You're a great reader. Did you buy the hardback yet? Because we have audiobooks coming out too. So do you
And
do anything with audiobooks?
recently we actually listened to Black Bear Alibi
Yeah.
that Jason Fuller put out with Nancy Peterson narrating, and it was really good. And it was nice because another TikTok thing, we got to see a narrator actually doing the book, putting the book down, the tracks down on, and it was something that says, hey, wait a minute, audiobook might be something else for us to get into, my wife and myself, eating
So
supper instead of throwing the TV on.
Yeah, exactly.
Throw an audiobook.
And you said we, so it's like, did you listen to it together?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different
when we were
experience.
eating supper.
My wife does a lot of audiobooks. So she signed up for the whatever that is, where you can listen to a bunch of audiobooks for one price per month. I forget what it's even called. But we used to do books on tape when we would be driving somewhere. Like I live in Florida, my dad lives in Ohio. So if we were driving to Ohio, normally I'm going to drive, in which case we're going to just listen to radio stations and that kind of thing in the old days, right? AM, trying to get a signal to the Smoky Mountains. But when she would drive, or if we were in her car, then she liked to go to Cracker Barrel and get a book on tape. And it was really hard for me to follow along with the story, because if they talk about whatever, they mention, the New York Yankee shirt, and at first glimpse, it looks like an old New York Yankee shirt where the paint, the what do you call it, the silk screen of the paint is all cracked. And in fact, it's not. It's like a word salad logo, right, that you're wearing. So they might describe the shirt, and then I'm thinking about, I've seen a shirt like that, and I'm off in my head doing something. I'm come back 5 minutes later, I'm like, even if it's 2 minutes later, like, crap, what did I miss? She was listening to some vampire story, and I just kept getting lost, because at that time you had one narrator, and my wife was really good about keeping the different, just like I said, there was 3 or 4 characters. I kept getting 2 of them confused, and there was like 2 plot lines, these 2 and these 2, but there's the same person voicing them all. So if you got lost a little, it's not like I was able to rewind it, because she didn't get lost, so she wouldn't rewind it. And I'm like, I'm lost, I can't keep track. And so it was more of an irritation to me. But what I'm finding out, like, I listen to a lot of podcasts now. I used to watch videos when I would work out on my treadmill. I had a TV in there. I'd watch videos or TV shows or whatever, right? And you're getting a lot of information, maybe politics or science or whatever. You get a lot of information. You're working out for an hour. It's on. It's an hour of absorbing whatever type of entertainment you want, whether it's informational or murder mystery or whatever. And a lot of times I would watch a movie over a couple of days. I'd see a movie from start to finish, right? Well, when I would work out outside, I didn't really have that. I would listen more to radio or whatever, or music. And then when the podcasts came along, I'm like, oh, I can listen to these guys, these comedians having a conversation, or some author, or some interview with Stephen King. So that was fun. And then I realized what I probably would prefer to do is do an audio book. So if I went out and I'm outside exercising, running, jogging on my street, maybe that's 30 minutes a day. Well, 5 days a week, that's 2.5 hours. Audiobooks tend to be long, like 10, 12 hours. But that means over the course of a couple of weeks, I digest that book. Or as I'm driving around doing my various appointments, doing different things, plug it in, pick up where I left off, and I maybe get through a book a week, audiobook that way while I'm still writing my own stuff. So it's a way to utilize found time. Doing the dishes or mowing the lawn. You're mowing the lawn or doing some yard work, put in the earbuds and you can get a story digested. But
my son is big into podcasts. When he'll come, he does my grass for me and stuff, and I try to get his attention. And even with the mower cut off, he don't hear me because he's got this podcast, and he's a World War II nut. He's been listening to a podcast that started from the beginning, 1933, and Hitler's rise to power all the way through. And I think he said I'm episode 274 or something, and I'm like, wow, that's just it's commitment too. But
but it's a great story, right? Because it's like the good guys win, so you can be patient with the development of different things. And there's so many. I mean, when you think about World War II, the first thing that jumps in your head is fighting the Germans. Well, that's over in Europe, there was the whole Pacific battles, and that's a whole other thing. Excuse me. And then there's the whole Africa campaigns, and if you wanted to tell that whole story, it's going to take a while. So,
Oh yeah, I think he got it from me, because that's one of the time periods, the last great generation, and they call it, but the love of that generation. And my step grandmother was a Holocaust survivor.
is that right?
Yeah, so she got me into. Shouldn't say she got me into enjoying studying the Holocaust, but I found that there is so much to it that nobody ever hears about because it's not taught, that dark side, the really dark side, that I wanted to interact with people as much as possible that had something story to tell. And the number of books that have finally been translated into English has allowed that to open up. And my son always saw that with things I would watch or things I was reading, and he'd come in, oh, well, you got a new book on this concentration camp, and what it going into. So I think that's it. It spurred him to this larger, I want to learn the whole war, and he'll come to me, did you know they fought here? Yeah, I did. I got lucky. My wife's grandfather was a World War II Marine, actually World War II and Korea. He was in the 1st Marine Division and actually one of the first people to land at Guadalcanal
Really?
at the start
Wow.
of the war. So to hear stories from him, I was actually reading a book one time and was talking about how this Japanese plane landed at I'm going to say Okinawa, and how it just blew up all of a sudden. And then I went up and I was talking to him, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I watched that happen. I was there." And it's that thing of, wow, history is sitting in front of you. How can you not find out what's going on?
Oh, but it's easy to because it's right there and it's just grandpa and you don't think, and a lot of those guys don't talk about that stuff.
Right.
When I was a kid, we had a neighbor up the street who was in World War II, he fought in the war, older guy. And I forget what we were up there doing, probably just a neighbor visit, my dad and him and one other guy chatting. And they were talking about, and this is just what hits you as a kid. So I'm there, again, I forget what the reason was, middle of the afternoon. And so I went up there with my dad. My dad was a physician, so it may have been my dad was just checking on the guy. He's an old guy, right? So the guy brings out some cheese and crackers. I'm all about the cheese and crackers. So I'm sitting on the floor, scarfing down cheese and crackers, and these guys are talking. And so there's my recollection is there's 2 guys talking about the war, and my dad talking about it with them. My dad was not in the war, and they go something about, yeah, he's chewing with those back teeth, and they're all like, yeah, I lost these. Didn't have a toothbrush for 3 months. You got cavities. You didn't have a dentist. You were pulling them out yourself and throwing them into the Rhine River or whatever. And so they were all like how they had to chew with their front teeth because they didn't get dentures, I guess. They had to chew with their front teeth because they didn't have molars because they went so long without just things. And as a little kid, I'm like, oh, you poor guys who just got old and couldn't afford a toothbrush or whatever. And I'm not thinking you spent 2 years or longer away from your families.
Yep.
Got on a boat one day and came back a couple years later and toured the world in between.
Oh yeah. It's being a veteran myself, I use the local VA hospital. So every now and then it's nice to, if you got a long wait for one of the doctors, if you can get one of them to open up, it's something else,
Now, are any of those relatives of yours that were in the war or the Holocaust, any of them still around?
No, my wife's grandfather passed away in 2003, and my step grandmother passed away. She was up there in age, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago.
How old was she when she passed away?
I think she was like 93.
Yeah, see, when Tom Brokaw came out with that book, The Greatest Generation, I enjoyed reading it because there were so many people who you kind of knew, like Daniel Inouye, and just other people, Bob Dole. And it's like just some old stiff guy or some old guy, and then you find out his actual story when he was a young guy and what that was all about. It really connected it for me. But then somebody else, Tom Hanks or somebody, did a commercial Well, of course, Tom Hanks did that great Band of Brothers. That was
Right.
huge. I really enjoyed that. I didn't enjoy, I think Stephen Ambrose wrote the book. I didn't enjoy the book as much as I enjoyed the series.
The series is better than the book, I think,
Um,
because it comes more to life to you.
I think you had better actors in the series than you had writer for the book. He was more of a historian who
Right.
writes telling historical books, but that's a far cry from a good drama, right? So,
Right.
or maybe I'm showing my bias there, but so I enjoyed that series. Saving Private Ryan, probably people have said it's the best war movie ever. But as much as I knew about the Normandy invasion, um, the the being there aspect that Spielberg brought to the screen and the futility of when the amphibious view, the front gates going down and the guys are shot before they even have a chance to get out, and boat after boat after boat of that happening. You just like as an audience member, I was like, and we won this thing. It's like holy cow, you know. So I forget why I got into that whole thing. Oh, I know. Because so Tom Hanks did a commercial at some point where he said the average age of a World War II veteran is X or whatever, 80 something, whenever he did that commercial. It was a long time ago. And he goes, something like, we're losing more and more of them every day. And it was about like kind of a capture their stories kind of thing. So he was, I guess they invited Spielberg, I think, did a lot of invite Holocaust survivors to record their story audibly, and they would have it in the Holocaust Museum. And I think Hanks's thing was World War II stories, just all these, heck, it was everybody back then, just about, just record their stories, relate their stories so that they'd be preserved. And it's like, you don't think about it now, but it's like when I have listened to some of those, and I've listened to a few of them, it's just so compelling because that guy who's telling that story when he's 18 has no idea. You're listening to him tell it as an old man, so you know he survived. But you get the ambiance of, I had no idea if I was going to die that day in the next hour or so. I had no idea if I was going to live or die. And, you know, I have a 12-year-old. We were reading a little bit about the Revolutionary War and about the integration where they forced the kids to go to the school in Alabama or where it was. And so this a couple years ago. So we're in my office and I'm like, honey, here's what I want you to think about. The distance, we have a long driveway. The distance those kids had to walk was from about our driveway, if our house was the school. I said, now imagine these kids were only a little older than you. Imagine you have to walk through this mob on either side, yelling at you, screaming at you. They don't want you here. They're calling your names. They're spitting at you. And you have to walk that whole way and then spend the whole day in that building. And the next day it's the same. The next day it's the same. We know looking back on it, and I was relating it to George Washington crossing the Delaware, I said, we know now, hundreds of years later, it all worked out fine. Those guys in that moment had no idea it was going to work out. Day by day, they don't know it's going to work. They don't know. And they hung in there and they made it happen. And here we are now because of their bravery. I think it stuck. I think it worked with me compelled. Her and a little friend who were here, that was during the pandemic. They were kind of homeschooling. But it was like when you hear it from somebody who's been there, done that, it takes on a whole other level of impact, I would say.
You mentioned the recordings. The World War II Museum and down in New Orleans actually has those recordings online.
Is that where they are?
I think so. The ones from Tom Hanks, but then Steven Spielberg is the Shoah Foundation with all the Holocaust survivors. And I don't know how many hours I've spent at listening to that stuff. My wife always asks me, don't you want to read something light now that you've read all that? And actually sometimes I even go heavier and I'll go into some dark fiction, because that way that's not real. Even though it might be darker, it's not real. The actual stories of the Holocaust being real open up a different portion.
Yeah, no doubt. And the thing is, so like when we studied the Holocaust, it was very, I wouldn't say it was sanitized, but it was the really horrid details were held back. I think that's fair to say, right? Mm-hmm. So when the internet opens up and you can actually see whether it's somebody, a pile of bodies, let's say, in whatever they showed us in a textbook, which I don't even know if they did, it was distant and gray and not But then you see, and there was color photography at the time. There's a movie of it's just jaws open and eyes shrunken and just walking around human skeletons still alive. It just and you got this healthy young guy soldier trying to help this same age skeleton to not die, in the next 10 minutes. And just the looks on their faces and stuff are just very it just brings it to a different level. And it's every single person who tells a Holocaust story. It wouldn't matter if there was 12 people in the same not bunk, but whatever you call it, barracks. 12 Holocaust survivors in the same barracks had 12 very similar experiences, but their unique perspective on it would be 12 different perspectives too.
Yeah.
Right? Like the one little kid who was, would go to the fence and make eyes at the little girl that he knew from his neighborhood, right? It's like totally different story from some mother who's worried about, are they going to kill my children next? Or, where's my husband? What happened to my mom and dad? Just, and I thought Spielberg's Schindler's List, talk about like wanting to go dark every once in a while. It's amazing storytelling. It's very, very, the first time I saw it, I was like, holy cow, they're just going to shoot this guy in the head because he was slow making hinges that day. Or the engineer, she's like, we're not going to argue with these people. Kill her on my authority right here in front of everybody. And then bang, she's dead, and you see her blood pumping out of her head, turning and melting the snow. And it's just things that I'm sure happened. No one showed that to us before. And if they did, I don't think they did, but if they did, they didn't do it in such a way that you got like I said, I like to let you like my characters a little bit before I kill them. So one of the ways that you show somebody to be empathetic is they're innocent, but they're still persecuted, or they didn't do anything wrong, and they're right. So here's this engineering student, this young lady, and she's like, the barracks will fall. It's dangerous. We have to do it this way. And they're like, kill her. We're not going to have arguments. And it's like, wait. And then he goes, then the dagger to the heart, tear it down, rebuild it like she said. Like, oh my God, right? So even if somebody had explained to me they shot this Jewish engineer woman, they didn't bring that crushing humanity to it the way Spielberg did. And so, when you watch that, and it's scene after scene after scene of that, it's like one of my favorite movies. And if you say it, it's like Schindler's List, like one of my favorite movies. It's like, oh, you must really hate Jews. I'm like, no. There's so much humanity, so many times you're wanting to ball up your fist and scream at the screen. It's great storytelling. It's not the greatest tragedy in the world because Pol Pot existed and Genghis Khan, but this is the one we know about, and we didn't know about it. We didn't know, we knew, but we didn't know.
Right. Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, Schindler's List is probably one of my favorite movies, and I don't think it was ever humanized, the entire experience of what the Holocaust was for them. It was never humanized the way Spielberg did. You can go back and you could read
Not that I ever saw.
Eli Wiesel. You could Night of Fog. I think that's it, or Night and Day.
We
It's
read Diary of Anne Frank, which
right.
doesn't go anywhere near that level of stuff. And we had grandparents and parents who in old newspaper articles, so we knew about it. But then if you wanted to see it, you were limited on what you're going to be able to see. We didn't have the internet when we were kids. Now you have it, and you can probably see most of it. But even then, to encapsulate it in a story, because those things probably did happen. And if they didn't, something similar did. And then to get that emotion where it just gets you, that's the whole point of why I enjoy the story. Not actually, both reasons. It's like I never saw anything like that, so I kind of want to see that because I've never seen that before, and to be emotionally affected by the way that little story was portrayed. So like a little snippet story, the injustice, and the whole thing is about injustice. There's little injustices, big injustices, bigger injustices, and like I said, about balling up your fist and screaming at the screen. If you can get that reaction from a reader, a viewer, at a player, whatever, you've accomplished something. You've made that connection.
Yeah, and that's why I said I want to be emotionally affected no matter what I'm doing. If I'm reading, if I'm watching a TV show, I want to feel that in some way, either the author of this book or the writer of that TV show or even music, I want to feel like somebody wrote something that was going to allow me to be emotionally invested in it. Just it might be for 3 pages in this book that I get sucked that far in, but it makes it so that the whole book is enjoyable. Or 3 minutes of a TV show, and I go, oh wait a minute, that was really touching, and now I have to see what else happens. You know,
Yeah.
musicians have a harder time because they're constrained to
Depends
the
on the
radio.
musician. You know, Gary Oldman portrayed Mozart, and there's some kind of a Mozart quote, and he was saying it, which was like, music is the only art that puts you in the head of the composer. I was like, that's interesting. With music, you're going to go where we're going to go. Or he played Beethoven. So my favorite composer of the classics is Mozart. And to me, it's like, you know how they always say, if you have something really good, that's the icing on the cake or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was like Mozart knew how to do icing on the icing. It's like he knew how to get to the really good stuff and then top it with something that was even really more than you thought. But you got to go where he's taking you, and you got to go at the pace. You know, in a book, you can jump ahead a little bit, or you can slow the pace. In music, you got to go at the pace they set it at, and there's a reason why those classics have hung around for a couple hundred years because they strike something within us.
Do you when you write, do you just mentioned Mozart? Do you keep Mozart playing in the background when you write, or
No,
are you
I
a quiet
so
writer?
when I first started writing, because my daughter was a baby, and so if I woke up in the middle of the night to feed her or whatever, I couldn't fall back to sleep. So I would come downstairs and write. And you got to be quiet, right? Now, it never occurred to me to put on headphones and listen to music. But the reason why is because I'm focused on what I'm doing, so I wouldn't listen to it anyway. Like when I'm focused, I'm not hearing any of that other stuff anyway, right? What I sometimes do, if I'm home by myself, so if I'm writing during the day, my wife maybe is out of town or just not in the house. My daughter's at school, and it's almost like too quiet. You hear the neighbor mowing his lawn or somebody nailing nails on a roof. That's the one's like bang, 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 and then it waits. So it's like bang, 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 bang. Oh, right. But it's not like right next door. It's like somewhere someone is nailing a roof, but I'm hearing it. So
Right.
I'll put on the TV so there's like white noise, so I don't hear the Amazon truck driving down. We got a speed bump right next to at the edge of my property. And it's like every work truck with a trailer doesn't know how to slow down for the speed, so it's bang, you hear that. And it's like, so there's just a little thing because my office is my office, and that right there is the street right out that window. So I tend to write in silence, but if I don't want it silent because there's like noise, like those distractions, then I'll put on the TV in the other room, whether it's a football game or a baseball game or not game shows because they're exciting and they're bells and whistles and stuff that tends to distract you, or maybe an old movie that I'm not interested in. Another thing I'll do is I'll put on one of my favorite movies, like Jurassic Park, like one of my favorite movies. So I'll put that on because it's X hours long, so that even though I don't watch it, by the time it's done, I know 2 hours overlapsed, or when something's happening, it kind of makes me look up. It's like, oh, an hour's gone by, kind of to keep me focused on don't daydream too much, stay focused. But
Right.
I have lots of other friends who have specific playlists. They love to listen to music when they write, and they have like one guy, a Detroit author, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. He'll say for this scene, this character is listening to such and such music. And that author has a musical background. He's like was got a Grammy. I have a friend in Colorado who writes, and she's just Pandora got her favorite tunes on there. And I never tried it just because I don't want the distraction. But the other reason is my habit was I started writing in silence. So it's just my habit is to do that.
Hmm.
But let me ask you something else. I know we've been
Okay.
going a little while, so hopefully we're not going.
Oh, we're fine.
That's funny. I looked up, my clock is stopped. Like every time it comes time to change the set an hour forward and back, it's like that's about when the battery in that it's a little wall clock, but it's got a pendulum, and the pendulum just wears the battery out every 6 months. So I looked up, I'm like, oh, it's only 9:15. How's that even possible? And I'm like, Oh, so I got to look over here. Oh, it's 12:30. We've been talking at 12.
I have one of those clocks and I haven't changed the battery in like 5 years. It looks nice hanging there and I just
There
leave
you
it
go.
alone.
For 6 months, I didn't, but it was such a habit for me to look there, and I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta change the battery. And I never think to look down here on my clock or tap my phone. I guess I'm getting other habits. I tend to look at my computer clock more, but I'll glance up there and it's like, okay, it's like, no, it's not 9:15. That thing's not moving. The pendulum's moving. The arms of the clock have stopped. So go figure. Anyhow, we can talk as long as you want, but I don't want to keep you all day. I know you got things to do. I wanted to ask you, so we should have asked you this in the beginning. So on TikTok, so when I look for you, it says Emil, right? Was that how I pronounce it?
Anal.
Emil.
Anal.
But you introduce your videos as Reverend Tut. So I wanted to ask you, what's the Reverend side of the situation here?
Well, it's pastor.
I'm sorry, pastor.
It's not.
Yes.
It's no big. It's the same thing. It's just.
Hey, look, I even wrote it down. Because I keep thinking pastor, but it's Reverend. I mean, it's pastor, not Reverend.
But that's
Anyway. So
pastor.
Tut.
Let's start. Well, Tut is my nickname.
Right.
I picked it up in the military. The first three letters of my last name. It's Tutelo. So nobody really wanted to call me that, so it became Tut. But pastor, about in 2012, I actually felt the calling to start preaching, and I went back to school late, and I was 45 years old, and I decided it was time for me to go and get a degree from the college, and that's where my life road took me, was that I wanted to preach the gospel and do it in a church setting and hopefully pastor a church. And so back in April, I actually got hired by a church that's about 30 miles from my house. So when I signed up for TikTok, I couldn't think what I wanted to do. And my wife was like, Pastor Tut, and you can do videos based around your faith, your beliefs. And I think I've only done like 2 of those. And I'm having a hard time translating.
She's on to something. You may start a second account for the religious aspect.
Right.
I have a friend from high school who, in high school, I would not have considered to be an overly religious guy. Actually, two friends from high school. One became a priest, and one eventually became a reverend. But he's a businessman, and late in life, he kind of started a church. It's more of an, I don't want to mischaracterize it. There's definitely physical in-person stuff, but it's almost more of an online. He's got like 40,000 followers. It's a big online following. But it was a kind of an odd thing for us to find out he was now Reverend Greg, because he wasn't that for the first couple of decades I know him. So you went to school, you got, what is it, a divinity degree or
I got a Bachelor of Science in Theology.
theology?
So
And then so now you are in a church?
Yeah, I pastor a church in Rocky Mount, Virginia, which is about 30 miles outside of Roanoke, which is southwestern Virginia in the Roanoke Valley.
Sure.
Right on the Blue Ridge Parkway, basically.
And how big of a congregation? So when did you? So you did that in 2012, and then you started up with this church. What, like 6 months ago, right?
6 months ago. Well, the way it works, the denomination I'm part of is called Church of the Brethren.
Okay.
And then when I graduated, started attending a local church, and what they do is they call you out into the ministry when you want to try to preach. And what they did was they got me to go do fill-in. Somebody needs off on a Sunday, so hey, you want some experience? Let's see how you do.
At the same church every week, or at different places?
Different places. I've traveled everywhere from Mount Airy, North Carolina, up to Charlottesville, Virginia, just about. So
I imagine all the congregations are kind of different too. They got their guy they like, they're kind of used to, and now here you are.
Yeah, and a lot of it, even though it's the same denomination, and it's the people are different in each one of those areas.
Yeah,
and it's no different. I grew up Roman Catholic.
Yeah, that's what I am.
I went to Latin mass when I was younger. My mom.
I don't ever remember going to Latin mass, but
oh no, my mom my mom and dad were married where I grew up in Rye, New York, but my mom grew up in Port Chester, and that church still did Latin mass on Sundays. And oh yeah, so it was that normal Roman, but each church was different. It's the same thing within our denomination. Every church has their quirks, what they like. So you're going in somewhere, there's that aspect of, oh, what am I going to notice? It's different. But the one thing that's so nice about going to the churches on Sundays is, hey, everybody's here for the same reason. So they're all going to be nice, hopefully,
Good point.
at least to your face,
You find out afterwards, what was that guy all about?
Yeah,
Don't send him back.
I didn't get that, but
So you said those are called fill-ins, so you did fill-in work for a while?
yeah, we call it pulpit supply. So I just did this fill-in work. I tell my wife, I'm driving to Mount Airy, North Carolina this weekend, an hour and a half away to go preach. And she'd be like, well, I'm going to read books while you're gone.
Fair enough.
But you mentioned that you had a friend, you didn't expect it, but that was the same thing for me. When I told my wife I wanted to go back to school and I think I want to follow this to become a pastor of a church, she laughed. That was her first reaction, was like, okay, right. Now you tell me something else,
But one of my other friends said, hey, so-and-so is becoming a reverend. I'm like, huh. Now I was a manager of a Fortune 500 company business. I hired a guy who was a reverend in a church. That church kind of fell on it was a big church, but it kind of got into some trouble, let's say. And so it kind of disbanded. And so he found himself one of those ball and night kind of guys. It's like, hey, the people I was associated with did some bad things. We all got the boot. I probably need to spend a year or two doing something else before I try to come back into a ministry. So he worked for me then. Great guy. And he did eventually get back in, and I never forget when I saw on Facebook that he finally got his own church again. It was like, because I don't think he had his own church where he was, so he ended up with a smaller group, shall we say, but he ended up getting the top slot there, and it was a big deal. It was good to see that. I knew him in that in between time. So the guy I knew was a reverend, but wasn't a reverend per se, and now he's back to that. It was just really neat to see, but it's a big deal. You're the head of the church, and they look to you for all kinds of things.
Yeah, my wife cautions me on that all the time. She's it's that great thing. My wife is my biggest supporter and my greatest critic. She'll
Keep you honest.
You gotta be careful. You gotta don't do this. When you're standing there, don't do that. And it's funny because I tell congregations that I've visited, and I'm the one that actually finally said, hey, we'd like you to stay here with us and shepherd us. I always tell them, I hate public speaking.
Yeah.
I never wanted to do it. And that was, but I said, God had another plan. He said, I want you to walk this path. I've got you, but you're going to do this. And the first time I stepped in the pulpit, it was Niagara Falls coming off the forehead. And, by the time I got home, I was like, this suit's got to go to the cleaners. But
well, that's kind of a classical biblical story. A lot of those Old Testament guys, who was it, Abraham or whatever, was 80 years old. He was still sitting on mom and dad's, living at home with mom and dad. God's like, hey, get up and go do your adventure. I think it was Abraham. You probably know better than I do. And then usually when they go off on the adventure, things don't get better. They get a lot worse before they get any better. So you've been there 6 months now. How's it going?
It's going good. We're a small
congregation, is it?
We average about 25 people on Sundays. We're not, I won't say we're real rural, but we're, I guess, in the holler of a mountain area.
Well, you said it's what part of Virginia? The western part?
Southwestern Virginia.
So that's the mountains anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, we are in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yeah. So like anything else, the cities in Virginia you've heard of them because they're big cities, and the ones you haven't heard of are probably smaller and a little more rural. And when you start out saying this is 30 miles or whatever from the city I've heard of, it's like, gonna guess if you're western of a city I've heard of, you're out in the mountains. It's just going to be a smaller
I mean, it's
population to draw from anyway.
a beautiful setting, because
Oh, it's
it's
gorgeous out there. Well, I don't need it
yeah.
from you. Especially
And
during the change of seasons, which is what? Are we past that yet or not to it yet?
actually, we've got quite a bit of color here where we're at now. It's
I'm in Tampa. Ours happens in January usually, if we get one.
if it happens, right?
The 2 or 3 elm trees that are around, or maple trees that are around, change colors, turn red in like January.
Yeah, I have a brother-in-law that lives in Florida. He's on the other coast. He's in Palm Bay,
Oh,
Florida.
nice, nice
So,
area.
and we like to get down there and visit, but we don't want to do it when we have changing weather here
No,
because we know
not
how
this time of
our
year.
seasons.
You go visit him in January when you guys
Yeah,
get a foot of snow. So, what do you drive out there? Do you only go out on Sundays, or do you have to be out there for other days of the week?
I usually do a Bible study on Tuesday nights, and then preaching on Sundays. Sometimes, if somebody needs a visitation, um, oh, it sounds weird, but when I say it's lucky, it's weird. But the biggest hospital is actually closer to where I live. I mean, 5 minutes away. So a lot of times, if somebody needs the
Oh,
hospital, my visitation is right there. So that
yeah,
makes it
fair enough.
a little more convenient. So no, we don't we don't do a lot. If we do revival, then it's a few nights during the week. But overall, yeah, Sundays and Tuesdays I'm out there, and it's it's been a it's been a blessing in that I love being there, and it's been one of those times of wow, I got so much stress because I work full time also. This isn't for me that it doesn't pay all the bills. It's
Sure.
it's my calling,
I was
not
gonna say just because God said it was a calling didn't mean it was a full-time job paying all the bills calling.
yeah,
This is in addition to your other stuff, not instead of.
yeah. So there's that stress of making time for everything.
Well, I would think that a congregation that averages that size is nice because it's intimate. You get to know the people, they get to know you, and then from there you can certainly expand and grow. And there's lots of opportunities that way.
Yeah, the family atmosphere is one of the things that when they actually said, "Hey, we'd love you to come here," even with the 30-mile drive, I was like, you know what? I think I was there. I was there in January filling in, and then I went back in March and filled in. That's when they decided, and I got to know everybody because yeah, they're when you get 25 people, we've had up to 49. So, but you get to know everybody. I wouldn't personally want to be in a church that's got thousands. I wouldn't want to pastor a
I
church like
think
that. I
when I
mean,
was a kid, it's hard for me to my church, St. Stephen's Church in Hamilton, Ohio, near Cincinnati, was one of those old Gothic styles. So it's pretty big as far as space. I was always an altar boy, a server, right? When I could be one, when I was old enough to be one. So we're looking out over the group as opposed to sitting in the pew looking forward. But no, it had pretty good attendance and all that. But I couldn't guess. I'd say maybe 300. I don't know, because to me, when I've given presentations, as an author, I get every once in a while asked to go speak or as part of organizations I've been involved in, do seminars or whatever. Um, you might be talking to a ballroom, but there's a bunch of tables and there's like 6 people, 4 people per table, and there's 20 tables. So it's a big ballroom and a lot of space taken up, but 100 people, right? Whereas if they just line up rows of chairs, 10 rows by 10 chairs is 100 people and it doesn't take up that much space. So kind of hard for me to guess, but I've always found that when I would speak to, there's a sweet spot. If a crowd, once it's more than say 10 or 20 people, it's a crowd and there's a comfort level that sets in. At that point, I don't care if it's 200. Probably changes again when there's like 1,000, because I don't think I've ever spoken to 1,000 people that way, like in person. But for me, it's much harder if it's 2 or 3 people. For me, it's very hard to talk to a group of 2 or 3 or 5, and then somewhere around 10 or 12, it's way easier for some reason. I don't know why.
the first church I ever spoke at, they averaged 7 people on a Sunday.
That
The
would that would be tough. That would be tough. I had a hard time doing that.
church has been there for about 110 years, but where it's built, it's so rural that the neighboring community has left. They've ever as the kids grew up, they moved away to find new opportunities.
Opportunities.
But the faithfuls who have been there that long, I think the youngest that I was preaching to was like 72, and the oldest was like 88 or something like that. So
not a wide range there.
The bad thing was I would go and I would pick the scripture I was going to talk to them about, and I felt like it was really good. But then I would think, well, you know what? You guys probably can teach me more than what I can teach you. You have lived longer with the experience and probably have spent more time studying it than I have. And, you know, they would always laugh and say, yeah, but you bring a new perspective for us. So,
but and you know, the point you made about the family feel, that's huge to the people who attend. Huge for you too, to enjoy the job, so to speak, but huge for them. We were looking for a preschool for my daughter. I got a couple recommendations, right? As our first kid. So we talked to friends who had kids that were older than ours, and where'd you go and what'd you think? And one place I went was very upscale, but very corporate looking. It was like walking through an office, and there was not cubicles, but like each room had each classroom had like a glass wall, but and all the kids were on computers and stuff, and it just seemed so sterile and so corporate, like a work environment. It just they were nice folks, and it's very successful. But I didn't think anything one way or the other. I'm like, okay, it looks safe and secure, and certainly educated. It looks like they're detail oriented. Went to another one. It was very wasn't real clean looking. It was more what I expected from a traditional school, but it was kind of some for whatever reason, maybe not well maintained is the way I'm thinking. Went to this other one, and it was a religious one. It was right down the street here. Small buildings. One was like not a mobile home, but like what do they call them?
Like those portable trailers that they
Yeah,
bring
that
in.
kind of thing. They had a name for it, but that's basically it. Yeah. One of the buildings was that. One or two of the buildings were old. You know, Florida things aren't that old, but the ones that are old are old. A couple of buildings of that, and then their main church, which it was like one of those concrete and steel buildings. So the inside they just changed it around to whatever they needed. So one day they're doing music in it, and the next day they reassembled it for a presentation. Then Sunday it's set up for the service, and a nice little grassy area. But everything about that place, looking at it, was, you know, a little old, a little this, a little that. But when I went in there, the family feel was huge. I can't explain it. The lady's name, I'll never forget. It's all these years ago, Danielle. Amazing woman, so nice, so sweet. All the kids. So my daughter and I had her dressed up because I was taking her around to look at too. But we're waiting. Danielle goes, I got to finish up with this lady. I'll be with you in a few minutes really for our visit. So we go wait in the yard area. And so we're sitting, they got a little swing set area. And so I'm putting her on the swing and I'm just kind of watching. And they've got a little, like an inflatable baby pool kind of deal, and a slide and a slip and slide. And Danielle had told me today's bathing suit day. So the kids are about to go have lunch and play for an hour out in a makeshift water park that they had created. So my daughter's got a dress on, right? So she's dressed up, I'm dressed up, and I'm pushing on the swing. And all of a sudden, all these doors open, all these kids run out in their bathing suits. They are tearing it up, having plenty of water balloon fights and squirt guns, and the teachers are all in on it. And my daughter's sitting there in her dress. She's like, "What? Do I get to play on all this stuff? Do I get to put on my bathing suit and go do this?" Then we take the tour. Everybody I met was nice. The entire time she went there, I had nothing but good experiences. And you see one or two kids who are underprivileged, let's say. And so my wife and I were like, hey, that kid obviously needs some things. We go to Danielle and say, hey, look, can we donate, like Lunchables and fresh fruit and fresh vegetables and this, that, and the other, and make sure they get to this kid? She's like, yeah, we'll handle it discreetly. I mean, just everything they did was so good. And I went to 3 places, and the one I wanted my kid to was not the cleanest, not the neatest, not the best agenda, but the atmosphere of that place. Totally sold me on it. And to this day, if they ever call and they need anything, I'm like, you got it, whatever you need. So that's how huge. And it's a small, I couldn't even tell you. I think they only have, It's a small congregation. It's bigger than 25, but it's not big. And
Wow.
it's just huge. It's part of the community. And I'm not a member of the church, but if they ever need anything, I give it to them because the way they establish that family feel. So that's how impactful that can be.
Yeah, that's so to me, it's one of those things, and then I try to keep it grounded in where I'm at. And we want people to feel welcome, and how do you feel welcome when you're family? You know, it's when you walk into a sanctuary or a worship area. I don't want you to feel like you're walking into this sterile environment. I was used to that growing up Roman Catholic. Everything was cold and quiet and methodical.
Definitely a lot of that.
I
Definitely.
want you to walk in and go, it's like sitting in my living room and we're gonna watch a YouTube video of somebody up there. And that's what I want people to do. And if they want to bring, most of them don't, but if they want to bring a drink in and sit down, or you know, bring your breakfast if you didn't get a chance on the way, because we're just going to sit down and we're going to enjoy each other's company, because that's what it's really all about. When we get down to, we have our faith, we have our beliefs, we know what we're doing. Well, how else do we figure out things? Well, it's through each other. It's through interactions, and
That personal touch, that family vibe. To be honest with you, when you first started doing your videos, they're not the smoothest, the first ones that you did, but
oh, no.
there's an honesty and integrity to them where you're kind of searching for the words to describe why you felt a certain way about a book, not even necessarily mine, just the videos you do. And that's why I wanted to reach out to you. Well, partly because you talked about one of my books. I wanted to say thanks. The reason I wanted to have you on the podcast was to be able to tell you that kind of connection, two different aspects. One, as far as a religious thing, Pastor Tut could be a second account of the religious stuff. One of the biggest podcasts in the world is a priest talking about the Bible, like the Bible in a year or whatever it's called. It's huge. Let's do it. It really wasn't for me, but it's connecting with a lot of people. So again, that integrity, you sharing what you find interesting about something in a TikTok will find its niche because of the demeanor you bring to it. And the other thing is about book reviews. Whenever I started TikTok a year ago, August, let's say, I think it was, I started watching it then. I didn't really do anything until like a year, maybe January. So maybe it's coming up on a year. I kind of lose track. But I would see people on Book Talk. One is a young lady named Starry Steph. She's huge now, but she wasn't then. And a few of the book talkers, but they would just come on and they would talk about why they liked a book. I've had a few of them on the one or two on the podcast here, and they go from where it's like they have a handful of followers for a while, and then after they get enough books that they review, suddenly they've got 1,000 or 2,000, and all of a sudden they've got like 10,000, and all of a sudden they're off to the races. And it's like feast and famine kind of thing. It's like there's a plateau, and then boom, you're on the next level. The reason why I want to jump on there with you about that was because you're going to find your sweet spot with the, if you haven't already, with the book reviews that you like to do. And Steph is one I follow. She's one that you could follow and look at and say, okay, I see why she's connecting. Now, on one hand, not to put her down, you could say there's nothing special about her. It's just the wholesome integrity she brings to. She's excited about a book that she's recommending when she gives it a review, right? So you're bringing that same kind of dynamic, different energy, but that's you. So you're bringing your energy, and you're going to appeal to a different. She's younger than we are. You're going to appeal to a different audience, but at the end of the day, there's so much depth to whatever audience you want to appeal to that they will slowly find you. And like I said, then all of a sudden it'll be 1,000 and then 10,000, and you'll just all of a sudden see it start to happen. So I wanted to let you know that I was glad that you found my books early on. So when you've got 2 million followers on your religious tut and on your book talk tut, remember us little folks who were here at the beginning. But and then I also I guess I got to tell your wife, thank you for recommending my book to you in the first place. She's the one that turned you on to me, right?
Yeah, she was watching a live that you did with JC Fuller. And she was like, well, who is this Dan Alatorre guy?
JC
And
is she's a pistol.
she
Yeah,
went to Amazon. Oh yeah, I love her.
what I used to do back then was I still like to do it. I just don't do it very often. I don't know why. So I would do a live. It's like say you and I would do a live, and then I could download that and post it on YouTube as well. So if you weren't there for it, you could watch it later. But the fun of the live thing was you're like you and I are ostensibly live because I'm not going to edit this. I'm going to put it up, but it's more relaxed because it's technically not live. But with a TikTok live, it's you see people popping on and asking questions, and you just never lose track of the fact that it's live. There's
Right.
potentially thousands or millions or whatever of people potentially doing it. So I think, listen, what you're doing is great stuff, both on the religious aspect, on the book aspect as well. It's only a matter of time before both of them explode. I can see that just because I'm not the best at picking out stars, but every once in a while when I see somebody who's like I said with Steph, I'm like, it's very obvious you're going to be huge. There's another lady I liked on TikTok. I'm like, she was more steamy romance, which is not my thing as a murder mystery. So I don't follow her anymore. But back then I did. And I'm like, it's very obvious with the energy you bring, you're going to be huge. And she is. And I liked your videos. And I'm like, this guy's just bringing a different vibe. And when the people who like the books he likes find him talking about them, they're gonna start coming. It's just gonna be like a magnet. They're just gonna come. And so I want to be sure I was able to tell you that because it's a little different when I tell you, as much as this is face to face versus writing that down, right? So
Right.
and I thought it'd be interesting to get an avid reader on here, find out what your interests were and how you came about discovering my books and all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoyed this. I'd love to have you back again sometime. Maybe
That's
get
fine.
your wife on and we'll find out what kind of stuff she's reading.
Yeah, we can. If you check her out at all, she's Books and Critters 72. If you've seen her, we actually do
Well, I
some.
clicked over because she made a comment. I clicked over and she said, yeah, my husband might like that, or whatever she said. And I was like, well, who's your husband? And as soon as I did, I'm like, wait a minute. And then I clicked through. I'm like, oh, okay, that's who this is.
Oh yeah, she was laughing. She was like, "Oh, Dan."
Yeah, she got me. But so I didn't follow her. I probably should have, but no, I'll remember to do it now. But
Yeah, we have some videos where we actually.
yes, you're in one of her more recent. Well, one of the more.
I'm in a
recent
few.
ones
We're in a
TikTok,
few that we do. We call it Going Rogue,
yeah,
and we reenact the books a little bit, but poorly.
those are fun.
But it's all in good fun, and it's to help promote the author with the book.
And like anything else, you're going to find out the stuff you enjoy doing is going to end up being the more popular stuff, just because of the enjoyment you bring to it. And you don't approach these things as well. It's been a week. I need to do a review. It's like I enjoyed this book. I want to share what I enjoyed about it. That's those book review people. Those sites on TikTok just seem to be going gangbusters. And I would still say it's early in that game. There's still a lot of people who are going to become very, very popular doing book reviews. So stick with it because you enjoy it. You read a lot. See, if I do book reviews, they're going to get like 4 reviews a year. That's not going to do anything for TikTok. You read enough to where there's a constant flow. And once they see one, they can click through and see others. Eventually maybe hundreds and then 1,000 and more. And that's just you hanging in there and keeping it as part of the routine.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I really do. It's when I first did it, it was, oh, I'm here in front of my phone and let me tell you about a book. But now I feel a little more comfortable, but I always want to be real with everybody. And the book may not be for somebody, but I enjoyed it, and I want you. That's what I want to come across.
Well, take this in the spirits intended. Some of that discomfort comes across as vulnerability, which is a human connection. So it's more watchable for that reason. And as just like my early writings probably aren't my best, I hope my most recent book is always my best that I've learned and grown. Your earliest videos aren't going to be your best necessarily. So you find your rhythm and then it goes from there as it does with all things. So I always tell everybody we're allowed to have early works. You're allowed to have early works as well. And
That's true.
yeah, and people understand that. They look at it and it's like, oh, well, this one's from a year ago, but the way you're doing it is, in my opinion, the right way to be doing it. So,
Well, thank you.
all righty, my friend. Well, listen, I kept you a lot longer than I promised I would, but it's because I was having a good time. I hope you were.
Hey, no, I did. I enjoyed this. I really did, Dan, and I look forward to doing it again.
love to do it again, and maybe we'll get your wife on next time and find out what she's up to. But
Okay.
we're gonna end it there. So thanks a lot, everybody, for following along with us today. We kind of, like my stories sometimes do, went around some different areas, but eventually we got where we were wanting to go. So thanks again, Pastor Tut. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Emil, and we'll talk to you again real soon, everybody.